Everyone, how are you all doing? I hope you're having a good day. We're having a good but cold day here. And I just want to say, I've never said this before, but I think it a lot. If you're here spending 10 minutes with me today in the Word, I'm really thankful and grateful for that. I'm glad you're incorporating this as part of your day. And whether you're watching this on Facebook or on YouTube, I would love if you would put a comment down below. And just to let me know, there's a few of you that are always faithful to make comments, and I appreciate all of you that do. But anyway, would love to hear from you. So we're in this new series, a spin-off of our series Little Things, looking at Gideon. Gideon was one of the judges in the Old Testament from the book of Judges. And I gave a little bit of an overview of Gideon's life. People briefly looked at the cycle of what is going on in the book of Judges. I want to come back today. I want to start and maybe give a lot of our focus today on a chart that I made that I showed you. I've added a little bit to it. And I want to make a few comments just to be very clear about what is going on. So, the book of Judges is a very interesting book. God made a promise to Abraham that he would build a great nation out of him, but Abraham himself only gave birth to a relatively few children. He didn't actually create a nation under Abraham directly, but that really came about 400 years later after his family had multiplied and multiplied and multiplied and multiplied. And now there was a great many of them living in Egypt. And in Egypt, um, the people suffered greatly. And that's when God raised up a leader named Moses. And Moses led the people out of Israel. Um, on their way to the promised land. They never made it under Moses. So after Moses, God raised up a man named Joshua. Joshua is the one that actually took them into the promised land. And it's there that they would actually be their own people, their own nation for the first time. After Joshua dies, God does not raise up a leader to lead the country. They were going to be what's known as a theocracy. God would be their king, and he would use people like priests and prophets and others to send word to the people. There were judges in like a civil sense, um, but there was not a single big figure that was supposed to rule the country. God was to be that person. But what the book of Judges demonstrates is we don't handle that well as people. That's what was going on for the Israelites. So we're looking at this chart or whatever you want to call it that I made up, which is the pattern that you're going to see over and over and over again. Now, it starts at the top here. The goal, this is the goal for every believer. Trust and obey God. That's always the goal. I don't know what your perception of the Old Testament is. For those who have been around the Bible and around Christianity longer, um, you'll have heard and learned, quite a few things about the Old Testament, about Israel and all. One of the things that comes to most people's minds are the rules. There were lots and lots of rules. Of course, there's the Ten Commandments that we're kind of familiar with, although most of us can't name all 10 if we had to, but we're familiar with those. And we also kind of know there's a whole bunch of other rules. In fact, there's 300 and some other rules in the Old Testament. And so you might think that in the Old Testament, it was all about trying to follow a bunch of rules. The rules were there, they were important, they were to be followed, but they weren't the primary focus. You have to remember, God was making a nation out of these people. And so some of the rules had to do with what we might call religion or spirituality. Some of the rules simply had to do with a legal system. Some of the rules had to do with what for them would be a medical system. Some of the rules were simply how do you get along with other people when you are being a nation? But the object of all of it, Jesus said when he was asked, what is the greatest commandment in the Old Testament? He quotes two of them. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all of your soul, and all of your mind. And he said the second one is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. The whole basis, the Old Testament, is a love relationship between God first and then between our fellow man second. So while there are a lot of rules, it wasn't about the rules themselves. It was about the relationship. Now let's step back into our chart. I can see time is really getting away from me already. Start there. When I say trust and obey, think of this love relationship between God and his people. What happened, I put reject and disobey God. Specifically, what they would do is they would take on the gods of the people around them. They would follow other spiritualities. And at first, they probably would just add the two together. I will follow the God of Israel and the God of the Canaanites or the God of the Midianites or whoever it is. But eventually what would happen is, and this is what always happens, when you try to mix God with other things, you will end up setting God aside. And that's what the people would do. So when I say reject and disobey God, that is what I'm referencing. Not they were suddenly breaking the Ten Commandments. Yes, they were. But that's not the focus. The focus is this love relationship that is now broken because they ultimately reject God. And so it says a number of times, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. In the book of Judges, it says that. When it says everyone did what was right in their own eyes, it doesn't mean that they were doing the right thing. It means in doing the wrong thing, they self-justified it. They came up with reasons for why they were they thought they were doing the right thing. And I see this play out over and over and over again in lots of people's lives, in my lives. Most of the time, when we are falling under the pattern of sin or things that replace God, we justify it. And it seems right in our own eyes. So if I was to come to you and talk to you about faith in Christ, you will tell me why. You may tell me, if you're not a believer, you probably would tell me why you don't need Jesus. And you will tell me why what you're doing presently is okay. That's everyone did what was right in their own eyes. So God has to, uh, I put punish, but I actually like the word discipline better. Punishment is something that God does in eternity to a sinner who has not repented, not had their sins forgiven, and no longer has an opportunity to. It has no, it does not restore a person, correct a person, or anything. Discipline from God is what actually corrects us and brings us back into a good place. So the New Testament says the Lord disciplines those he loves. So anyway, God is punishing or disciplining the children of Israel, usually by bringing another nation in to come and take over. The people suffer greatly. They cry out to God for help. They don't actually know what their actual problem is. They know they don't like the suffering. And so they cry out to God. He sends them a judge who will explain to them that you are all the way back here at reject and disobey God. You shouldn't have had those idols. You shouldn't have followed those other belief systems, those other spiritualities. You need to follow him. And so the judge will both lead them back to God and take care of whatever the foreign nation is that's causing them so much trouble. And the people's hearts will turn to God, and now they're back to the original place, except for the pattern will start all over again. Gideon, that we're looking at, is the fifth of many judges in the book of Judges. By chapter 6, we're already on judge number 6 in this pattern. I want us to quickly look at Judges chapter 3, and you're going to see this happen. The Israelites lived among Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, and they took their daughters in marriage. That's something they should never have done. God told them not to do that. I'm not going to cover why, But God told him, don't do that. And he then, and they sometimes they gave their daughters to these people to be married to them. And they weren't supposed to do that. In some of the cases, they were actually supposed to completely wipe out these people. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served, here we go, the Baals and the Asherahs. That's the other people's gods. And the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, so he sold them into the hands, in this case, of this guy in this nation for 8 years. The people cried out. He raised up a deliverer, Othniel. So the land had peace for 40 years. They're back to a good place. Look at what it says immediately after. And again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And because it did evil in the eyes of the Lord gave Eglon, king of Moab, power over Israel. And the crazy cycle begins again. But remember, the goal on God's part is not to be harsh to us. It's not to be mean to us. When God brings suffering into our lives, it's to develop us, and in some cases, to bring us back to a place where we desire this good, loving relationship with Him, where we trust Him and we follow Him, we obey Him. Judges is simply the people struggling back and forth with that. We're going to return to our guy named Gideon. We're not going to look at all of the book of Judges. We're going to return, Lord willing, on Friday to Gideon and begin to look again more at his particular story. But I really wanted to set the background in place for us as we step into that because it might not be familiar to all of you. Anyway, I hope you have a good couple days, and Lord willing, I hope to see you on Friday.